This week, I want to talk about the decline of small angling clubs. There's some underlying trends that are going on. One is that the number of people course fishing in the UK is diminishing. It's going down year on year, and this is evidenced by the number of rod licenses being sold, which have gone from over 1 million in 2018 to about 900,000 in 2023. There was a COVID bounce in 2020 when the government said you can't do anything for a few weeks. Angling clubs almost panicked, started giving a free month or two to their members, saying you'll get 13 or 14 months membership for your subs. They needn't have worried, because when we were allowed to do things again, still quite restricted. A lot of indoor things couldn't be participated in. Things like gyms stayed shut, but you could go walking and fishing and cycling. So quite a few people who'd been fishing years ago, who'd still got a few bits of old gear in the loft or in the garage, dug them out, bought a bit of new kit to get going again, and joined fishing clubs and bought licenses. So the EA reported that in the second quarter of 2020, the number of licenses that they would normally have sold went up by 200,000. So there was this bounce, and the fishing clubs gained from it as well, because instead of losing members, which is what they thought people wouldn't bother, they actually got lots of new members. One or two clubs actually said, just for the moment, we're holding on new membership. But quite a few clubs had sort of 20 or 30% increases on normal. But that gradual decline over 5 years has been going on a lot longer. It's been going on decades, really. And some of the huge clubs like the Birmingham Anglers Association had over 60,000 members in 1970, and that has declined. I don't know what their current numbers are, but it's more like 10,000. And they had lots of affiliated small clubs that were based around all sorts of works clubs and so on, all around Birmingham. And it's a similar story with things like the LAA. But I'm really talking about the small clubs that are independent. And what has happened near to me in Dorset is that two clubs have disappeared altogether. That was the Western Club and the Stallbridge Club. And both of these clubs had something in common, in that they just had a small stretch of river fishing for their members. So very simple clubs, about as simple as they get. They're renting some fishing, half a mile or so, paying a chunk of rent every year. They've got fairly small expenses overall. All they need is to cover that rent and a bit more. Maybe just say it's £1,000 a year for rent, and they need 1,200 to cover it all. As long as they've got 40 members paying £30, very cheap fishing, they're all right. But with the general sort of decline of people bothering to fish rivers, and these were stretches that were just average bits of the upper Stour rather than bits that were renowned for barbel and big chub and stuff, anglers lost interest. There were very few youngsters coming along, and once you can't get that £1,200, and then you've got inflation, people, the landlords saying, we want more money, we're going to set our rents with inflation based rises, so it might go up 2% every year and so on. You can get to the point where if you needed 40 members and suddenly you've only got 25, you might have a bit of reserve there. It gets to the point where you've run out of reserves. There's no way to get more members. You haven't got enough money to get some more waters, to generate more membership. And that was the problem. And so those clubs, which were almost as small and simple as you could get, vanished. I don't know the whole story behind what happened. One problem with small clubs is often the people running them, going back 50 years when I was a youngster, there were occasionally teenagers on committees. There were most of the committee men were people in their 20s and 30s, one or two in their 40s and 50s. Whereas now, quite often, the people on committees of fishing clubs are retirees. And I'm a retiree, but this has become typical. You might say, well, there's lots of younger anglers, but they're not joining clubs. What they're doing is either joining syndicates for carp fishing, or they're going to what are basically commercial carp fisheries. They're not commercials in the sense that people have thought of over the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, where you stuff some small match lakes with lots of small carp and F1s and bream and stuff and fish matches. And these are waters where you have great big pitches where you can put your bivvy up, some facilities on site. There might be a shower block, proper loos, and people are these younger anglers are fishing for several days and nights. So, a 72-hour session, and they're not paying the sort of £8, £10, £12 a day that those fishing the ordinary commercials are doing, or anything like the cheap club fishing. In Dorset, cheap club fishing is around, the general subs are about £60 a year, and people who are senior citizens would get that for more like £40, £45. And the bigger clubs, it's sort of more like £180, and then going down to 100, 120. But these younger anglers who are fishing for 72 hours are paying more than they would pay for a year's fishing with a small club, because they want to catch what is basically simple, easy, big carp fishing. They're not the biggest carp in these sort of waters, but they're fished to £30 maybe, good chance of doubles, 20s. Like I say, much bigger than that, less likely. And then you're getting onto the syndicate waters, or the much bigger lakes, the big gravel pits, some of which are actually available on club tickets. Is there an answer to this decline? Possibly not. I've mentioned two clubs. Downton Angling Club also went, that's it, just into Wiltshire. They had water on the Hampshire Avon, or Wiltshire Avon as it would be there. And again, just a bit of river fishing, and they couldn't sustain it. In each of these cases, the fishing that those clubs had has been taken up by other local clubs, possibly slightly bigger clubs for the time being anyway. So the fishing itself hasn't been lost. There's certainly food for thought on small clubs. Stillwater fishing is becoming far more popular because anglers on average are much older. Lots of these small clubs that are surviving, and the bigger clubs, half their membership nowadays is of pensionable age. Half. It's not that long ago when it was 5%, 10%. Go back 40 years, that's all. So those younger anglers from 40 years ago are still fishing. Some of them are still fishing, but they're now in their late 60s, 70s. And then there comes a point when they're unable to carry on fishing because of ill health. And that accessibility for older anglers becomes more important. So if there's a still water, people prefer that. It's safer. The banks are probably flat. Short walks in some cases, drive round and park behind your peg. Whereas on the river, it's still that steeplechase, as we say, of climbing over stiles, walking across fields, steep banks, trees in the water, and all the rest of it. I hope I've got you thinking about what's happening with these clubs. I'm not going to pretend to provide any answers. I've done my stint on club committees and a huge amount of work on maintaining waters, trying to get waters. It's often a thankless task, not always appreciated. But until younger anglers come along, there's a great danger that some of these clubs will literally die out. On that not very happy note, I'm going to say goodbye for now.